little introduction to Prof.M.D.Nalapat. He has already interacted with you twice, or more than that. Today he is giving a lecture on India's foreign policy at 75. That is navigating through the contemporary geopolitical crisis. That's the topic that he is listed. So you will be sharing his views on what has happened in the last 75 years and what are the major crises. Thank you, sir.
I'm happy to be back. Happy to be among you. So we are basically talking about India at 75. The country is 75. And we are talking about the question of the evolution of Indian foreign policy post 1947. Now, independence was of course a complete change from the past. You were under the British Raj, you were basically, the decisions were taken about you, for you by an alien power. But after 1947, you were on your own in a sense. In some respects, the changes were very limited. In the administrative sphere, for example, we retained a lot of the colonial construct of administration. If I'm not mistaken, the Indian Penal Code and the Code of the Criminal Procedure are both dated 1861. Now, frankly, if they were dated 1961, by 2022 they'd be hopelessly out of date. But we are unique as a country by having a criminal code and a code of, an IPC, which is dated 1861. And it's completely doesn't fit the modern era at all. You have, for example, an Information Technology Act that was passed in the beginning, in the year of, I think, the greatest triumph of Indian IT, which is Y2K. Y2K is a problem that this did not happen. And why did it not happen? It did not happen in large part because of the efforts of software engineers from India who were drafted into that. And it is the success of the Indian software industry that ensured that there was a very smooth transition in Y2K. And as a consequence, Indian IT came on the map. And then, of course, the government of the day decided that they would have, a clear look at the information technology, and the Information Technology Acts came into force. And frankly, until that time, for about 7-8 years, our information technology sector was growing at a phenomenal speed. Double digit is only the lower end of it, that's 10%. We're talking 20%, 30% rate of growth, annual rate of growth. After the IT Act and the efforts to kind of, create a kind of a framework for that, the rate of growth slowed down. I'm not saying regulation is bad. Regulation is very, very important. But regulation cannot be the norm. The regulation is not there for its own sake. That whatever the citizen does has got to be under control. Now you have two ways of looking at a question of the individual rights. One is to say that government will say that look, these A, B, C, D kind of rights are going to be regulated. Anything else you're free to do. Or the government will say that we will tell you what you are free to do and anything else is regulated by us. The colonial construct is really a believer in the second type of situation, in which the government tells you, okay, you can do this and that. Anything else technically can come under government control. That is absolutely the wrong way of doing about things, especially in a knowledge-oriented economy. You go back to the past. I'm giving you context because it's important to keep the context in view whenever we analyze a particular issue. In any kind of policy, for example. Now, you take, for example, the context of the India-US nuclear deal. there were discussions that were going on. I remember Jaswant Singh, on the Indian side, and you had a chap called Stoke Talbot on the US side, and they were discussing the contours of the deal. Now, the more extreme variants of the deal, of the Indo-US nuclear deal, it's still, frankly, quite an imperfect deal. I don't see why we needed to go for that deal. In the sense that we have enough of the uranium in our country, but surprisingly, whenever there's a uranium mine being exploited, you always have 20 PILs being filed on environment ground, this ground, that ground, whatever it is, and that particular project is cancelled or called off. You have countries in Africa that are with uranium and which we could have exploited. For some reason, we didn't exploit them. Now, we have countries in Africa that got lithium, which is looking at giving it to India. But for some odd reason, somehow we're just not accessing it. I don't know, it's certainly not geopolitics involved. We are big enough to be able to access it. We are technologically skilled enough to be able to access it. There are other factors involved which I'm not really sure what they are. But the point is, one of the conditions that was put in the original drafts of the deal, Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister of the Indian side, as I recall, when the nuclear deal was being discussed for some time, and then it came on to Jaswant Singh, and the Vajpayee government actually was very active in that particular deal. Manmohan Singh came after that. He came at a time when the deal was virtually finalized. In the Vajpayee period, there was an effort to get conditions on us such that even research in our key atomic research institutions, you have to give prior notice to the authority, the external authority. Now, what does that mean? It means when you conduct an experiment dealing with anything to do with the nuclear thing, you have to give notice, which basically means for 3-4 months you can't conduct an experiment. Now, in a real dynamic situation, you have to change your experiment, you have to change the contours of the experiment, you have to change sometimes the objectives of the experiment, the parameters, virtually on a day-to-day basis, if not on a minute-to-minute basis. If we make it on a 6-month to 6-month basis, your entire nuclear research will go into the waste basket. And that was the intention of those who introduced that kind of condition from Washington on the deal. So of course, fortunately for India, there were some people who were very opposed to that particular nuclear deal. I was among them. You had Bharat Karna, you had Brahma Chalani, you had a few others who were totally opposed to the deal. And we were privately briefed by some of our best atomic scientists. At least I had good fortune. And I raised very severe objections in whatever media was accessible to me at that point in time about why this is a sellout and this will harm Indian interests and we can't do that. Way back in the 1990s, I had written an article for Times of India, an op-ed, called The Thumb of Ekalavya. You remember that Ekalavya was the archer who learned archery by watching Dronacharya teach the princess. And then he came and said, "Sir, I have learned from you. What is the dakshina I have to give you?" And frankly, this is something I can never forgive the Guru for. It was the most horrific request. Cut your thumb off. Which means after that you just can't, you can't be an archer. So I said, what America is trying to do is to cut the nuclear thumb of India. We are like Ekalavya. We came from nowhere. And from nowhere, we developed our skills and became a good nuclear power, a nuclear weapons power, a nuclear research power. And you're asking us to cut off, like Ekalavya. We are not going to make the mistake of Ekalavya. We are not going to cut off our thumb. That particular item is still doing the rounds here and there. But as I said, if you check back Chalani, nuclear, India-US nuclear deal, Karnat India-US nuclear deal, Nalapat India-US nuclear deal on Google, you may find a few comments that have been made by us. Eventually, Americans also got more sensible. They realized that you can't, push India behind the point. Of course, India was already pushed beyond the point. We were a very early nuclear power. For some reason, we could have detonated a bomb even when Pandit Nehru was the Prime Minister. We didn't do so. We could have detonated a second Pokhran immediately after the first Pokhran, 74. We didn't do so. 98, after that we have not detonated anything. We have relied on computer modeling. I think that's good enough. But from what I know, we have a good, a fairly effective weapon system, trigger, etc. But what I'm trying to say is we have had a lot of self-restraint. In a sense, as a country, we have the drawbacks of not being an NPT member. The drawbacks are you have sanctions and tremendous sanctions on Indian technology, and they said that anything can be doing with technology. Some American official can say that this ballpoint pen can technically be used to write equations which are helpful in the nuclear program. So you should sanction and make sure India doesn't get any of this kind of thing from abroad. There were a ridiculous list of banned items for India, and at the same time, an abundant list of items that were supplied to China. Now, the logic of banning the world's largest democracy and opening the floodgates of technology to the world's largest dictatorship were not obvious to many of us, but it seems they were obvious to the people who were running policy in Washington, and if I may say so, in Europe at that point in time. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that, there are certain, when policy is put in such a way that you have constraints on innovation, on enterprise, on the generation of knowledge, on the use of knowledge in practical systems, then you're going to have a slowdown in your expansion of activity, in your deepening of empowerment. So, in my case, I'm a person who basically is a servant of practice. Theory is important to the extent that it can be put into practice. It is useful not as a means of really amusing myself by academic, if I may say so, academic sense, purely theoretical, constructs. And you build on that, and you can have a lot of effort, a lot of challenge, a lot of useful times going into that. But in terms of practical utility, the practical utility will be almost zero. From my point of view, I analyze policy from the point of view of practical utility. And if something does not have practical utility, for me, frankly, that policy is worthless. It may be brilliantly presented. It may have 1,600 mathematical and other theorems. It may have a complete logical structure, in abstract, independent of any practical application. But I would prefer a much less complex structure, a much less, if I may say so, clear structure. If that slightly fuzzy structure is helpful to me in a practical way. So sometimes what happens is you sacrifice a certain amount of what you would call rigor. In terms, it becomes a little more fuzzy, but it also becomes a lot more practical. Because for me, as someone who's one of the earliest practitioners of geopolitics, frankly, there were not too many at that point in time. We are considered to have the first chair in India. I don't think there's any chair in Asia. I'm not sure there were geopolitics chairs in many parts of the world. Maybe one or two here and there, maybe in Russia, maybe in Germany, I don't know. But certainly our university under Chancellor Ramdas Pai and Vice Chancellor Maria, they had this thing. Let's bring geopolitics into the university, and let's bring geopolitics into the structure of Indian policy. The department was started with that objective in mind. I think we're doing a reasonably good job of it. So what I want to say is when we are looking at foreign policy of the last 75 years, we are looking at the practical effect of foreign policy on the empowerment of the Indian people and the salience of India within the global great power format. A country with 1/5 of the global population anyway is a major power. If you look at it as a great power in terms of significance, have these policies helped the significance? And at least in my view, and I believe in the power of the individual, and even in the Soviet Union, in the Soviet communist system, if you go to, for example, some of these townships that were created for Russian nuclear scientists, for Russian space scientists, you go there, you will find foreign items freely available. You would find that the Russian scientists would abuse the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. They'd abuse whoever was General Secretary. It was not Nikita Khrushchev, it was Brezhnev who was there. They used to abuse Brezhnev, left, right and center. And after that, you had Chernenko, another walking disaster. You had Andropov, poor fellow couldn't walk, so a non-walking disaster. And then you had Gorbachev, who was a complete disaster for the CPSU. But the fact is that until the time of Gorbachev, you could not say any of this, except if you were a nuclear scientist or a space scientist. Then you could say anything. Why? Because the Russians realized that if you don't have a free mind, if you don't have a freedom of thought in one boundary, you are going to have a problem of freedom of thought in the field which you are dealing with. You can't be a good nuclear scientist and then go around saying Brezhnev was the most wonderful guy on earth, or Chernenko is the most dynamic individual I've seen, or Yuri Andropov is the healthiest guy I know. It is all absolutely fake. So in those little townships, the kind of conversations that were there were as free as any conversation in any democracy in the world. They were functioning democracies without election, of course. Obviously not. You can't elect in a township, and fortunately that kind of thing was not there. But there was freedom of thought. So personally, in my point of view, one of the problems that I've analyzed from Indian foreign policy for a considerable period of time, it is to some extent becoming less now, but in the beginning, we're talking of 47 now, the administrative structure remained largely intact. Some other structures, the judicial structure remained largely intact. It did not change. The foreign policy structure did go through a major change. And that major change was in what we call non-alignment. Now the point is, how was this foreign policy formulated? Usually, in the case of the Communist Party of China, Deng Xiaoping's party, from the time Deng Xiaoping came to power, you had a system in which supposing somebody comes up with a bright idea, you test that idea out in a half a dozen places. Let's say it's an idea for dealing with municipal waste. You test it out in 3-4 towns. Find out the effect. So you have 6-7 ideas on municipal waste. You test out the ideas in towns. Then you analyze the results. Then you find 2-3 ideas are done reasonably well. Then you test out those ideas in bigger towns. So by that process of testing and iteration, they finally came up with what they believed was the best way of dealing with it. And then they would centralize that policy. It came up through an iterative process, through an experimental process, and it was a very effective process. That's why that country had such remarkable rates of growth from the 1980s onwards. Under Deng Xiaoping's time, and going into Jiang Zemin's time, and in fact even, I would say significantly, during Wu's time. Because it was a consultative, iterative process. Now, In the case of Indian foreign policy, it was the vision, in my view, of one man and those around him who agreed with him. And that one man was a giant of a man, a genius, Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, sometimes in public, many times in private, people have been fairly, not very complimentary to me, saying that I am a Nehru phobe. I don't like, which is absolutely untrue. Nehru's grandson Rajiv Gandhi, one of the most wonderful people on earth. Mrs. Gandhi was an extremely admirable individual, and Nehru, of course, I have only seen him, passing by in a car when I was there in Kaf Parade, when he went to the Bhabha Atomic Research Center. At that time it was called, I think, TIFR, and he went there with TIFR, and then we saw a huge convoy of cars, and Nehru was there in an open-top car, and he was waving at everybody, and I think they were throwing flowers at him. He was, of course, immediately throwing the flowers back. I don't think he was too happy about the flowers being thrown at him, because he didn't allow them to. He just, as soon as then he threw them back, and finally, of course, escaped all the flowers. But the reality of the situation is, I am not a Nehru phobe or a Nehru fan. I am what I would hope to be called an India fan. And when I say India fan, an Indian people fan. You understand? When I say Indian people also, please understand, it's not that humanity as such, let's put it that way. People generally, I frankly, whenever I go to a different country, people are people. You adjust to them. And in my own case, I used to go to the United States in the 90s. And in the 90s, how much we were? I think we had $25 a day to get by, legally. $25 a day to go very far, even in the US at that point in time. We had to stay with people. And I used to stay with people. And in fact, especially with the Jewish people, my feelings towards the Jewish community grew and developed as a result of the fact that I stayed in so many Jewish households, and I realized that Jewish households are as noisy as Indian households. I never thought anybody could be noisier than an Indian household. I don't want to name some states in the country whose households are particularly noisy. I have enormous affection for the people of those states. There's one particular state, which is close to a neighbor of ours. I have a lot of affection for them. They're outstanding people, and they're very noisy people. You stay in their houses, my God, you need earmuffs to prevent that. But believe me, they're nothing compared to the households I've stayed in the United States. They're, in terms of decibel level, they're huge. So the fact is, we're the same, frankly, as human beings, But what I want to say is that this great foreign policy of ours was decided by one man and a group of people who largely agreed with his vision. Now, it could be that, you have the Eureka moment, that is, you have a scientist suddenly, I think Eureka was said somewhere, Archimedes or whatever. But in foreign policy, I think it's better not to avoid that kind of a Eureka moment, and to go in for a slightly consultative process in which you discuss and debate among various others what is the best foreign policy for India, what is the best economic policy for India. We adopted a lot of the Soviet policy. Soviet Union was doing pretty well at that point in time, frankly. I don't blame the people here. Central planning, the planning commission, everything was introduced at that time. The commanding heights of the Indian economy will be in the public sector. Then in 1969, you had bank nationalization. The commanding heights of access to money will be in the hands of the government. So what would happen? The government would then appoint bankers, and these poor bankers would get a salary which is not even 1 million of the money that they control in decisions of theirs. So you have a situation which you have immense power and a low salary. Now, way back, Lee Kuan Yew, if you are in Singapore, he said that the mistake India made was to have the higher the responsibility, the lower the salary. So you have people with extremely low salaries and very high responsibilities, and they said if people get tempted as a consequence of that, it's a problem. Now, so, well, all I'm saying is that our foreign policy, our economic policy, all these policies in a particular framework, and the framework was that the West was bad. And yes, the West was not only bad, it was awful. The West was exploitative, the West was ruthless, the West was cruel. It was a terrible thing. But the question is, was the West bad for the West people, for the people of the West? From that point of view, I'm not entirely sure that you could say that the Western governments treated their own people the way they treated the colonized people. They treated the colonized people horribly. The laws that we are so proud of, British law, is British law for colonized people. It's not British law for the British. If you implemented that law in Britain, there'd be a complete revolt immediately in Britain. So the point is, there were a lot of good things to be learned from the West dealing with their own people. Because now we had a government dealing with our own people. It was no longer a government imposed from outside. It was a government dealing with our own people. So fundamentally what happens? When you seamlessly move from the ICS into a different era, but the same kind of mindsets, even for a long part the same kind of training, horseback, I mean, I'm not, even back in 1947, I don't think horses were used as transportation. I mean, you may have some but horseback was an essential element of that training. The same old training of 100 years ago was maintained at this point in time. So the reality is therefore that, this situation in which you have that kind of a structure and this kind of an individual. So the point is the foreign policy, what was the goal it was intended to serve? From my reading of the situation, they had the most lofty goals you can ever think of. The goal was nothing less than changing the world, with India basically the spear point of that changed world. You have a lovely world order in which there is global peace. There is universal harmony. Every country gets on with every other country. There is no exploitation. It's an absolutely beautiful concept. It's a concept which frankly, it is a lovely dream. But when you start thinking that what happened to you in a dream is reality. So the point is, the dream is a dream and reality is reality. And when we talk of policy, we are not talking of policy in a world of dreams. We are talking of policy in a world of reality. And I'm sorry, but in my case, I would judge a policy by its impact on reality. I'm not going to judge a policy in terms of what it intends to do, what it wants to do. The question is, will it be effective in doing it? And then you judge the policy by how effective that policy has been in doing it. Now, sometimes you have an acid test of the policy. We had an acid test of non-alignment as a policy, of being very, of the third. And I must say that there are certain things that we did which were outstanding, necessary, and which I'm proud of. One of them is the strong emphasis of Pandit Nehru on decolonization. Nehru was one of the pioneers, one of the first global leader who talked sharply about decolonization, Western decolonization. Of course, there was colonization taking place in the USSR as well, internally and externally, but not too much said about that. But decolonization, Western decolonization, India was tremendously effective. India was tremendously effective in freedom movements in different countries. Don't forget, the ANC was recognized as a separate entity And the ANC had, long before Nelson Mandela was released, the ANC had its mission in Delhi. The Palestine, the state of Palestine was recognized in India way back, if I'm not mistaken, the 1950s or something. And even today, the state of Palestine is not recognized by so many countries. Even after the Dayton Accord, even after, Camp David, even after all that, you still have not really got a separate Palestinian state. But we have recognized a separate Palestinian state. We have an ambassador of Palestine in India. And we have an ambassador, Nelson Mandela, his party ANC. We had a representative of the ANC in India. So I must say that these are amazing, revolutionary, remarkable and admirable efforts of India under Nehru. But nobody is perfect. So when you look at certain other things. Now in my case I have a small bias. I look at things from the point of view of economic welfare. Because I think economic welfare is the foundation of welfare in a lot of other fields. Whether it is housing, whether it's education, whether it's nutrition, whether it's health related to nutrition, economic welfare is fundamental. So in my case, I always tend to subject the policy to analysis from the prism of does it promote economic welfare or not? And if it does, how effectively does it promote economic welfare? A policy that promotes economic welfare, promotes high economic growth, is in my view a good policy. Now, it may not be a dream policy. It may not be a policy that, I don't know, which, can be packaged in a very attractive way. But the reality is, the most horrible thing that you can see is the sight of a starving man. The most terrible thing you can see is the sight of a starving family. Way back, long back, when I was, around your age, as a matter of fact, there was an institution which asked me to do certain surveys of homes in the slums of Mumbai. And you had to interview people in the slums. And you were given a 5 or 6 page questionnaire. Frankly, the questionnaires, surprisingly for me, a little bit of Marathi, a little bit of Hindi, a little bit of English could get you through most of the questionnaire because the people there knew Marathi, they knew Hindi, they knew English, everybody, more or less. Of course, a lot of people knew Malayalam and Tamil and Telugu as well, but we won't go into that. But the point is, unemployment among the youth. When you have a young man who has done well in college, who has passed maybe his bachelor's, his master's, and he's unemployed for 5-6 years. At the end of 5-6 years, there's a psychic transformation in the person. He doesn't want to come out and meet people. He is constantly, he constantly gets the feeling his parents are looking at him, we expected you to contribute, but you are not contributing. Well, it doesn't matter, we will support you. It's a terribly painful process of psychic adjustment to the reality of youth unemployment. So for me, that is something, an objective to work for, to mitigate, to reduce youth unemployment. Because the impact of that would be terrible. And in large part, I would say, if you go back to Europe, for example, if you go back to the history of certain groups, let's say in Germany, a large part of that was driven by the search for identity of the unemployed. When you are completely unemployed, you are drained of all identity, because in our society, identity comes very significantly from status. And status comes very significantly from your economic platform for lack of it. With the result that now you have, let's say, a political party. You join a political party, then you get an identity. You have a party which claims to be the master race, you get a superior identity. You have a party that goes and beats up other people, you have a strength of, you have a feeling of empowerment. That is the kind of mindset that creates social movements that are divisive and disruptive. And which is where youth unemployment is also a security problem for a country. When you have large-scale youth unemployment, underemployment, it's a security problem for the country. Then what happens is they can be utilized in various ways, including in ways that are destructive of the country's essential fabric of societal stability. So this is what I'm saying is, for me, every policy has got to be geared towards creating a healthier, better India. And you do that, and in that process, India then becomes a situation where we can also help large areas of the world. If you yourself are not well, you can't treat others, right? If you're a doctor and you're sick, I wouldn't advise you to go around, trying to treat patients. You make even those who are not sick. You get yourself better, treat yourself, be healthy, then you go out and treat. So the point is, when I'm looking at foreign policy, I'm looking at foreign policy from the point of view of the impact of foreign policy on the population of the country. Does foreign policy serve that purpose? Because ultimately, whether it's economic policy, whether it's foreign policy, they should have a common purpose, because there is no separation between foreign and domestic. It's like external and internal terrorism. I think for quite some time I've been saying, and writing as well, that it's an artificial thing to talk about external terrorism, internal terrorism. Because external terrorism comes into your country. Your internal terrorism goes out of the country. Where is the difference? Today, where is the difference? It's in and out. So domestic and foreign policy, and in my view again, foreign policy and domestic policy should subserve a national purpose. And in my view, the national purpose is the betterment of the lives of the ordinary people of the country. That is, what I think Mahatma Gandhi called Antyodaya. Do you remember? Basically that, the most underprivileged individual that you think, does your policy benefit him or her? And if not, well, rethink that. So, and I think that's a marvelous way of looking at that whole situation. So, I'd only like to say that so far as our foreign policy is concerned, the question is, did we make the best use of the opportunities we had after we became one of the most significant country liberated, almost the first country liberated from the colonial oppressors? After India, we had a lot of countries in Asia, we had a lot of countries in Europe, and again I'd like to compliment Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi stood by the Vietnamese people in their battle against oppression. The Americans made the mistake of their lives by stepping into the shoes of the French colonial oppressors of the Vietnamese people. The French are a lovely people, wonderful people, but the fact is in Vietnam, they had no business being there. And the fact is, when they were thrown out by the Vietnamese, Americans had no business stepping into their shoes and trying to take their place. And they also were thrown out by the Vietnamese. A pretty tough country, and a very, very, very strong and resilient people. But what I'm trying to say is that Mrs. Gandhi stood by the Vietnamese people very strongly, and she stood under enormous pressure. Lyndon Johnson was telling us that you will starve to death. And at that point in time, frankly, our Green Revolution, begun by Lal Bahadur Shastri, was just taking off. Actually, the real hero of the Green Revolution, there are two people. One is Lal Bahadur Shastri, other is a chap called Sri Chidambaram. Subramanian. Chidambaram was the finance minister of India. He did one good thing in his life, which is slashed taxes in 96, And after that, he said, I've done enough good things in my life. The rest of his career as a minister, I don't see any other good thing that he's done. But anyway, that's a personal view. But Subramaniam, C. Subramaniam and Lal Bahadur Shastri were the people who introduced the Green Revolution with the help of American scientists. You had a lot of American scientists coming here, working hard. How many do we remember? None. How many do we celebrate? None. They made it. How many do we think about Lal Bahadur Shastri except in the context of the 1965 war? No. Lal Bahadur Shastri was the father of the Green Revolution. And if I may say so, his biggest partner was C. Subramaniam. So these are the people. But at that point in time, the country was starving. But even then, Indira Gandhi stood firm and said, nothing doing, we are not going to change our policy. We are going to oppose this war. You are wrong in this war. So please again understand one thing. We need a nuanced look at foreign policy. Whenever I see an individual who I believe looks at everything in black and white terms, in either or terms, it's either 0 or 100, this kind of a binary, I'm a little nervous about that individual's capacity for, if I may say so, analyzing events. Because nothing is black and white. Nothing. Of course, I'm not talking this in a literal sense, because we have black and we have white. But I'm talking in a metaphorical way. So nothing is black. It's all in between. So the reality, again, I would like to say is that our rate of growth was not spectacular during that period. It was about 2%. 2% was not a very high rate of growth during that period. Our 47, we became a free country. 67, we were a starving country. 20 years had gone by. In 20 years, why? And we had the Zamindari abolition, we had this, we had that, we had all these things happening. It didn't help. Eventually, we had tremendous food deficit. So the point is, in terms of the effect and the impact of the policy, did it help or not? And foreign policy has to be a handmaiden of domestic policy. Foreign policy cannot be the driver of policy in a country. It has got to be the handmaiden of domestic policy. When you make foreign policy front and center, when you say that we are going to transform the world, unfortunately, the world does not get transformed and you suffer as a consequence of it. You understand? So, as I said, this is one way of looking at it. You can also look at it and say that I'm not an individual who seems to, have too many cosmic feelings about the world, but believe me, I do. The only point is, I know what is practical and what is not. And something that is not practical, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. If you take a personal example, for example, I have a nephew who does about 20,000 steps a day. And, if it were practical for me to do 20,000, I would do it. But for me, I would say, even the 10,000 is something that I'm supposed to be doing every day. It's a bit of a stretch for me. I'm thinking if I should go down to 7. Now my nephew comes and says, what's wrong with you? 20,000 is a normal. It's not normal. It's not normal for me. You understand? So the point is, it's not practical for me. It's practical for him. The guy is an athlete. It's not practical for me. So the question is not the ideal objective. Ideally, of course, I should be doing 20,000 steps a day, of course. But practically, I can't do it. Practically, what is possible? So you judge through the prism of practicality. You judge through the prism of substantive, concrete results. And that is how you need to judge the policies of foreign policy, domestic policy, and both these policies, because they are two strands of a common DNA. I would not like to separate the two, because foreign and domestic, but when you have foreign policy as your overriding goal, when you say our country is going to be, guiding the world, I'm afraid nobody wants to be guided. These days, frankly, If your parents tell you that, please be guided by us, I think many of you are not going to be very happy about it, because you may think that you have, you can guide yourself a little better. Now, if you look at a macro context of countries, unfortunately or fortunately, they have the same point of view. You can't do that. And when you have a regulatory system that's very controlled, in which everything has to be guided from the top down, you have a problem. Because eventually, I can tell you, in today's knowledge economy, what has happened, especially now, you have an explosion of knowledge. Now, I'm giving you this broader context because I know, let's be honest, every one of you knows the major milestones in our foreign policy. You know what happened in 71, you know the Shimla, you know Tashkent, you know Commonwealth, you know everything. I am not Mr. Google to go and reproduce that to you. I'd only like to give you a certain context for what we are saying. And in terms of that context, the question is, how do we look at the policies that we have had? That is the point. Now take for example the whole question of alignment and non-alignment. I would say that, again, ideally speaking, it's a perfect kind of thing. Practically speaking, we don't know. But the point is very simple. Why I am coming to all this now is that today, in 1950s, we had a tremendous opportunity in India. Not an opportunity to guide the world and lead the world, but an opportunity to go to an economy that is 7, 8, 9, 10%. We were stuck at 2%. Today we have an opportunity to again leapfrog and become a huge major industrial and global power. You are seeing that to some extent happen. Apple is shifting here. You are seeing efforts at computer chips being made here. Foxconn and Vedanta are doing that. We have still got a lot of issues in the regulatory framework and all that, but things are definitely, the opportunity is there. Cold War 2.0, when I'd like to see if there's somebody else who pointed this before I did, but in Cold War 2.0, people are shifting their companies from China to other countries. India is the obvious country to shift to. It's a tremendous opportunity for us. Cold War 1.2 was a tremendous opportunity for China. China grabbed it with both hands, and grabbed it and used it to leap from height to height in terms of economic growth. Cold War 2.2 has given a similar opportunity to India because there is a move away from China. Most of these companies could find a good home in India for the simple reason our manpower resources, our talent pool. It's enormous. You look at the Indian mind, you look at the Indian talent, it's absolutely outstanding. I'm not saying this because, I have the same passport as most of you have, but I'm saying it because it's true. So the reality is that this opportunity, if we miss this opportunity, and in my book, my last sentence is this, that, historians may forgive, but history will not forgive if this opportunity is missed. This is the opportunity we have today. And this opportunity is putting us in a situation where the Chinese took a clear decision in Cold War 1.2. They joined hands with the Americans against, if I may say so, against the USSR, against Russia. They joined hands. Today we have an opportunity in Cold War 2.2. That Cold War is deepening in terms of its impact. Some people say there's no Cold War, nothing doing, it will pass over, everybody will be good friends. It's not happening. It's not going to happen. The dynamics of Cold War 2.0 are rolling on. The more it goes on, the more opportunity it has. Why? Because if you go to the United States, you go to Europe, you go to any part of the world, the extent of regard for India is inversely proportional to the worry they have about China. People who are not worried about China at all are not bothered about India. People who are worried about China are very attentive towards India. That is the logic of Cold War 2.0. That is the opportunity that we now have as a country. And that is the opportunity that, like China did, we have to grab it with both hands and leap, in a sense, higher and higher. And why? So that we become a middle-income country and are on track to become a high-income country. Believe me, it's not a done deal that we're going to be a middle-income country. In terms of sheer number, we may have reached very impressive metrics. In terms of per capita, we are abysmally low even today. In terms of many of these metrics, we are still far too low compared to the quality of the Indian people. And this is where the question of this opportunity of Cold War 1.2 was grabbed by China. We should do a China by grabbing the opportunity of Cold War 2.0. 1.0, China's war. 2.0, India's war. So that is the sense, that book that I wrote, that 75 years of Indian foreign policy. Essentially, the central point is that this is the chance that we have. In fact, my next book, Manipal will bring out a section of my collected thinking, first set and second set. And there's one more book coming out which I just finished the manuscript of, which is basically on great power rivalry. It's a process of evolution of my thinking. But this book essentially this is the opportunity we have. And frankly, I have not written this book for people my age. I have not written this book even for people of Ravi's age. I have written this book for people of your age. Because if we miss this opportunity, you guys are the ones who are going to suffer the most. And if we grab this opportunity, you guys are the ones who are going to benefit the most. So please, ladies and gentlemen, don't feel that you are disinterested in the field of policy, that you have you're going to keep aloof and Olympian heights. The fact of the matter is, this is a crucial period in not only human history, but the history of India. And this is a crucial opportunity for us, that if this opportunity goes, and it can go, the window can close in 2-3 years, 4-5 years, who knows? Vietnam is grabbing it with both hands. Indonesia is now looking at grabbing it with at least one hand. We are the strongest in terms of potential. We need to now actualize that potential. Foreign policy is a means of actualizing that potential. So that has been the central thesis of that book of mine, 75 Years of Indian Foreign Policy. And this is, I'm happy to be told by my publishers that it's doing well. And I do hope it's not being read by people of my age, it's not being read by people of Ravi's age, I hope it's being read by people of your age. So essentially, I have written about this. Essentially, it's a book about the next 75 years of India. It's okay, it's about 75 years, yes, but really speaking, my target is the next 75 years. They have to be way, way better than the previous 75 years of India. And this is possible if in this generation we seize the opportunity we had, like the generation of Chinese in the 1980s and the 1990s seized their opportunity. This is our opportunity and we need to seize it. And that is the message that I'd like to say. As far as foreign policy is concerned, as I said, you have Professor Google who can teach you all these various, this kind of thing. I'm not Professor Google, quite frankly. And, I'm only happy that I think, an Indian is in charge of Professor Google. That means that he can't be doing very bad. But one thing I'd like to tell you about the problem that we are facing today. And again, it's a problem that I wrote about 3-4 years ago, which unfortunately I'm taken seriously only when it's too late. Let's say, for example, there's a huge pit, and I keep warning you, watch out, you're going to fall into that pit. After you fall into the pit, you say, my God, you were right. But before falling into that pit, nobody listens to me. So, unfortunately, that's been the story of my life. I'm only listened to when it's too late for them and they do what I told them not to do. So what I want to say, today what's happening? Today what's happening through these Google and all these other search engines. Let's say, for example, you are a particular mindset. Let's say you support a particular political party. Or let's say you support a particular, a particular country. Somehow, because of your smartphone and this and that, the algorithms have mapped you already. So you go to Google and let us say that let's take a politician in you, let's say. Let's say the Chief Minister of my home state of Kerala, a chap called Pinarayi Vijayan, nice fellow, very nice chap. He's a decent guy, a good administrator. And I'm not saying this because he's the Chief Minister of my home state, he is really that. But if you like Pinarayi Vijayan, you would have said so many things and tweets and things about Pinarayi Vijayan, which will all have been mapped. That's the scary thing now. Our AI would have mapped you. So when you go on a search engine about Pinarayi Vijayan, the results that come up are results that are really very nice and favorable to Pinarayi Vijayan. So they reinforce your view that the guy is terrific. On the other hand, if you're Shashi Tharoor or somebody else who doesn't like Pinarayi Vijayan, and I think Shashi now is more than he was, then the search engine knows that. And they come up with the result that you like. Pinarayi Vijayan is this, Pinarayi Vijayan is that, things like that. So the problem is, when we are searching for a result, we are being reinforced in the impressions we already have. We are not getting results that give us a challenge in terms of alternatives. We are looking at results that reinforce our existing views, with the result that we are digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into our existing views. It's happening in a family. Let's say in a family, somebody says that hijab is good. Somebody says hijab is bad. The brother may say hijab is bad, the sister may say hijab is good. Now, when the sister goes on the internet, all the things most of the things she reads is about how the hijab is such a wonderful thing. And the brother, when he goes on the internet, how it's awful, it's terrible. So in the family, you have the split. And the split is growing bigger and bigger with social media. So instead of uniting, instead of in a sense promoting, if I may say so, alternative points of view, contradictory points of view, it's now promoting a very monochromatic view of reality and hardening your views so that they become harder and harder. A pro-hijab person becomes more and more pro-hijab, and anti-hijab person becomes more and more anti-hijab. And this is what is happening. It is happening within families, it's happening within societies, it's happening within groups of friends. And this is not a very healthy sign for a society where different, diverse, disparate groups have got to come together. Because the only way in which we can learn from each other is by understanding each other, by not, getting upset if somebody gives a contrarian view. That's the point. Let us say, for example, some of my colleagues here, they have some very contrarian views to me. Fine, that's okay. They're not mortal enemies of mine because of that. But anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is, this is a problem now that we are facing in society. And this is a problem that we don't have an answer to. We are, each of us now, into our own little thought bubble. And our own little thought group. And we are getting into Orwellian group thinking. And this should not lead us back to 1984. We should go on to 2024 and not 1984. So I've said this without, as Ravi knows very well, if you invite me to give a talk about a particular subject, I have talked about anything except the subject. So you should be used to this by now. But I'll be happy to field questions from you, including on foreign policy. a little bit of writing on foreign policy, so I'll be happy to field questions from you on that. But what I want to tell you is this is the point. We are at an inflectional point in our country, we are at an inflectional point in our society, and I'm talking of human society. I'm talking about even the whole world as such. And in that inflectional point, it's very important we get our sums well, and we get our policies well. Because if we don't, if we miss this opportunity, it's going to be a long time before we get it. We got one opportunity in the 50s, gone. Another opportunity now, if that goes, God knows when we're going to get the third opportunity. And what condition will be when we get that third opportunity. Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks for the enlightening lecture. Janardhan, I'm a second year student here, sir. Sir, thanks for giving us a brief on how the next 75 years is going to be very important for India. Like, how do you see the role of upcoming students in geopolitics or analysts? Because there is more of a, I see implicitly you gave importance to the private sector which is getting in, and also I'm just like at a crossroads, like how the geopolitical analysts like you and all would have an impact on the government in looking after it.
Look, as I said, the chances are now significant. For example, there's something called country risk. There's something called societal risk. And risk management, dealing with risk, understanding risk has now become a very central part of corporate activity. In risk management, you chaps are now ideally positioned to understand what risk is all about and to possibly suggest remedial measures for that kind of risk. So that's the private sector. Government, of course, they also depend strategy of the think tanks, universities. I hope some of you will remain behind in our department. But very, very definitely, the field is now significantly bigger. My only request to you, keep developing your specialization and wherever possible, complete your educational process. Wherever possible. And then develop your specialization. Because especially in the private sector now, the really exploding field is that of risk management. Every country is now looking at risk management. Before you invest in a country, what is the risk element? And for you, that we have geopolitical training, that you are ideally suited to advise them on that.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Naranjana Kashyap, a second year student. So my question is, you mentioned that there should not be any separation between domestic and foreign policy. So sir, currently, how do you see the domestic policy influencing India's foreign policy? Especially with so many recent incidents regarding let's say the Manipal controversy or stuff like that. So how is it influencing the foreign policy right now?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say that when we look at influencing, the question is what segments are we looking at? Are we looking at, for example, a section of the media? Are we looking at a section of public opinion? Are we looking at government? Because you have, for example, G to G, government to government. You have, people to people. You have government to people. So, as far as India is concerned, quite frankly, there is an organized effort to paint India into the most horrible colors, which frankly I think is absurd. But it's not having an impact because, let's be honest, I'm not sure if I mentioned this book or my next book, but the reality is that, it is essential for Russia and China that India not be a partner of the United States in order for them to secure the Indo-Pacific and the Eurasian continent. It is essential for the United States to have India as a partner to ensure that the Sino-Russian alliance does not secure the Indo-Pacific and the Eurasian continent. So we are the absolutely critical swing state. We are that China was the swing state in the first Cold War. We are the swing state in the second Cold War. The Russians and the Chinese have to ensure we don't get too close to Americans. And that is where, for example, you have in America, a lot of negativity about India. In India, a lot of negativity about America. Now, America, for example, that negativity is also effective. It is totally absurd. You have to wait 2 years, 2.5 years for a tourist visa to go to the United States. I mean, what kind of treatment of a democracy is this? If you're a citizen of India, it takes 2 years for you to get an appointment with some bureaucrat in the US embassy. There's something wrong here. There's something wrong in the algorithms. Who has designed the algorithms? Who has created this kind of a confusion? Because it's not happening in so many other countries. Why is it happening in the case of India? The essential country for the United States is India. They know it. And yet, if you're an Indian citizen and you want to go to the US, let's say, some relative of yours getting married there, you can't go. You're given an appointment in 2026. It's absurd. So, same thing in India, a lot of negativity of America is put forward in India. And this kind of a thing we have to be watchful about. But I can only say, the impact is in our own bubbles. Now, the New York Times is part of a particular bubble. The impact is fantastic of certain activities in that bubble. On other activities, no effect at all. The problem is that all these bubbles are now self-contained. They only receive what they want to receive. Everything else is in the outside. So the problem is, the problem with your question is, it depends on what bubble you're talking about. The New York Times, Washington Post, media, that bubble, oh my God, India, a horrible country. But then, of course, fortunately, they even going to extend the same with a certain community in India, which is about 1 billion strong, are basically, going around killing people of other communities. That's the main occupation. Which, I've talked to people who honestly believe this, who really believe that there are rivers of blood, in India. Frankly, I have been traveling quite a fair amount. I have yet to see any of these rivers of blood anywhere. Maybe I'm missing something. But so the point is, fortunately, these bubbles don't come. Former Vice President Biden and Senator Harris used to abuse the government of India quite significantly on the campaign trail. President Biden and Vice President Harris are very effusively complimentary to India. As soon as they were sworn in, they changed. Why? Because they understood the centrality of India to US interests. In the book which has just come out, some people are accusing me of being pro-American. It's very odd, but many Americans accuse me of being pro-Russian. And a lot of people, including some of the people sitting in this classroom, have accused me of being pro-Chinese. So I'm glad that I'm seen as whatever. But the reality of the situation is that America is essential to India. We don't want an Indo-Pacific dominated by the Sino-Russian alliance. As it is, the Eurasian continent is too heavily dominated by them. And please understand one thing. We are talking about the collapse of the BRI. The Belt and Road system has collapsed. Please understand what are the objectives of the Belt and Road system. I have studied China a lot. Allow me to say that I like that country a lot. I respect its people. In fact, I like its people very much. And I admire the Communist Party of China because they have done an outstanding job in holding on to power and building up a very powerful country. But the BRI, why is it dollar denominated? Xi Jinping is always talking about the dollar not being important. We must have renminbi, we must have other things. He doesn't talk about rupees for some odd reason. He doesn't seem to like rupees very much. But ruble. But why does every single debt of the BRI owned by a country get denominated in dollars? Now today, with the rise in the price of the dollar, the debt burden on these countries is becoming unbearable. Let us say that I took a loan from, let's say, some rich person, of say $10,000. I have to pay it back in dollars. You have to pay your BRI debts in terms of dollars. Now when the dollar was 60 rupees, I have to pay back something. Now it's 80 rupees, I have to pay back much more. 30% more. So that's what's happening. The debt is becoming crippling. What does it mean? It means the Chinese can grab asset after asset after asset in a lot of countries. I have calculated about 60, 70 countries that they can grab assets because of the rise in the price of the dollar. So essentially, again, coming back to your question, fundamentally, the interest between India and the United States are society. We have had a bottom-up relationship, not a top-down. It's not the president tells us be nice to Indians. People look at Indians, they like them, and we like Americans, and a tremendous amount of linkages are taken with these. So that's why the relationship is fundamentally healthy. So personally, this kind of thing makes an impact on a particular bubble. But again, I'd like to tell you, a large part of what you're seeing in that bubble, in almost every bubble, is just not factually true. And you have fact checkers who are basically creating facts of their own and then doubting the facts that are facts by saying, we have fact checked and this is not wrong. So even the fact checking industry has become an industry for rooting in your minds things that are not correct. So I really like to say that fundamentally, let me say, the Indian people are not a fanatic people. Wherever they come from, I've given the example of the Hindi-speaking people. I have gone to Sri Lanka so many times. Sinhala, imposed Sinhala on the country. Now the Ukrainians, throughout Russian-speaking people. Russian has been banned. English has not been banned in India. And who are the people who want most to learn English? From my travels, people of UP and Bihar. The people who are most interested in learning English are the people of UP and Bihar. What is their mother tongue? It's not Telugu, it's not Marathi, it's Hindi. And why? Because they see it as a means to advancement. And that is my complaint with some of the people who ran the government running this country for so long. They see English as some alien influence. They go about in Western dresses, they have cars, they go about in aircraft, but English is an alien influence. No, English is a weapon of war. And what is that war? The war for a better life. The war for better opportunities for people. Why are you learning English? Because it enables you to go across. Why are some people learning Chinese? Why are some people learning German? Why? In fact, I advised 20 years ago, for God's sake, start learning Portuguese. There are at least 600,000 vacancies in Portugal, in Brazil, waiting for people who know Portuguese. How many people in India do we know who know Portuguese? A few thousand, maybe. 600,000 jobs are potentially there in Brazil for anybody who speaks good Portuguese. So this is the point. Language is an instrument. If you see language, if you're defining your culture as being so weak that even learning a language will dilute your culture, that's not true. Culture is a very strong foundational element. It's independent of language. It's independent of dress. It's independent of diet. It's independent of lifestyle. It's something in our DNA. You understand? So I'd like to say I'm not very concerned about that, because believe me, the United States knows the importance of India. We know the importance. That's why, for example, Georgia Meloni is now being welcomed by open arms. The first person who is going to welcome her with open arms will be a lady called Ursula von der Leyen, the so-called president of the European Commission. And she is going, because she needs it. And Georgia Meloni will have a bigger smile for her, because Italy needs the EU. the EU's money and the EU's access. The EU needs Italy. Eventually, I'm afraid, it's all a question of mutual need and mutual interests. And by the way, I'm not one of those who believe that Georgia Meloni is going to be a disaster. I think she's a very capable person, and in my personal view, she could surprise a lot of people.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Harsha, I'm second year. So, my question is, non-alignment as a policy has played a dynamic role in the past 75 years. Now, you said that we have to be prepared for the next 75 years, right? So, don't you think it is a high time to revisit our chapters of foreign policy to have a clear structure and plan for the next coming up emerging challenges? And if so, what could be the base that we could create for the next 75 years, according to you?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer, because the fact is that we are now living in a very dynamic world, and technology is changing very, very fast. Lifestyles are changing very, very fast. Attitudes are changing very, very fast. So it has to be a flexible structure that can accommodate those changes. And at the same time, there must be something called the core national interest. You have to define what is the core national interest. I mean, I have defined core national interest in my way of thinking as economic betterment of the people. My people, the people of India. So the question is, what is your core national interest? And eventually, a policy that is flexible, a policy that is realistic, that does not, look at the world as it should be, but the world as it is. Now, you have, for example, if you go to a paper called Sunday Guardian and you check this Sunday, 2 days ago, there's a front page article by me on Xi Jinping and Modi, and how everybody has said that Xi Jinping and Modi both want peace in Ukraine. The message of Xi was very different from the message of Modi, but it's been interpreted in Western media as the same message, because Western media today is expert at basically presenting what they want to be as what is. They want Russia to be an ogre. They want Putin to be a disaster, so they present that way. They want China to be a peacemaker. They are terrified of going into a bad situation with China. So they are presenting Xi as a peacemaker, which is not the case. So, Xi basically told Putin, go ahead and settle this problem, use whatever means you have, and settle it in a very decisive way, which is good for you. Modi's point was, stop war completely. It's a totally different message. But the Western media mixed the two messages. So, again, I'd like to say, that's a question which will frankly, a structure of thought, a structure of thinking, and policies, etc. But fundamentally, I'd like to say, I do believe that we have to go along with the other democracies. Follow the Indians. Where are Indians migrating to? Follow them. Follow the people. Are we migrating to China? We should migrate to Russia, but the Russians don't allow us. But we're not, where are we migrating to? We should be migrating to Brazil, but we don't know Portuguese. We're by those countries where the people-to-people contact is multiplying. The Middle East. Middle East is a very good partner for India. Because India and the Middle East have been getting along for a very long time. And they're very friendly partners to India. The conversation that New York Times has got, obviously nobody in the Middle East is reading the New York Times. Because today's relationship with India is extremely warm. Why? Mutual interest. They need our talent. They need our technology. We need their capital. We need their strategic depth. Eventually, it's a question of fundamental interests. It's a question of mutual interest. Which is why the Middle East and India are today much closer than it was the case in the previous administration. To the shock of so many people. It's nothing to be shocked about. Because today, young people, they want a good future. They're not going to be satisfied with a second-class future. They want a first-class future. And the leaders will have to provide them that. And if they don't provide them that, they're going to be in trouble. Including in China. So, I'd only like to say that all I can say about policy, it should be realistic, it should be flexible, and it should basically support our core interests.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Akhil Ajit, second year student at the department. So my question is regarding the point which I mentioned, the need for India to tap the opportunities in the coming time. So one of the opportunities which India recently has faced is with respect to RCEP. So since India has exited from RCEP, so how do you think it impacts India's global position in multilateralism, especially multilateral trading order, economic order? And is it right to say that whatever the success and failure of India's decision in exiting from RCEP should be measured in extent to which India is able to align to the goals of foreign policy?
Yeah, I would like to say that we have got a free trade agreement with almost every member of RCEP. With I don't know about Laos and Cambodia, but every member barring China, Laos and Cambodia. RCEP was, in my view, a trap for India. A trap to give the Chinese even bigger entry into the Indian market than they now have. As it is, they have too much of an entry into the Indian market. Smuggling and legal. And RCEP would have given them complete open door. It's not even a half open, now it's a 3/4 open door. They'll make it a complete open door. So personally, I'm very happy we did not sign RCEP. Because we have free trade agreements with almost all the members of RCEP. Today, we have free trade agreements with them. Barring China and one or two other countries. I think Laos is one of them, maybe Cambodia, but otherwise, frankly, the Chinese have got the most to gain from RCEP. So, personally, the problem is the TPP. Trump walked away from the TPP. I think, that was one of the very foolish mistakes that he made. Biden made a stupid mistake in Afghanistan, Trump made a very stupid mistake in walking away from TPP. We have to revise the TPP. And there's no question about it. We have to revise some kind of a trans-Pacific partnership with India also as part of it. And now we are getting the new structure. If you remember now, there's a new kind of economic structure that has been initiated, an Indo-Pac structure, Indo-Pacific structure. And in that Indo-Pacific structure, we are on board now. So that has got to take root. So frankly, on RCEP, I don't believe we should have been members because that will only benefit one country, China.
My name is Samantha, I'm a second year student. So my question is, as you said, Russia and China wants to avoid India being close to US, and US has its interest in being close to India now. So how does the relationship with China and Russia, as staying monoline is not an option now, and for how long should India be a swing state?
See, I'd like to say that we have a very, I think this government has done a good job of diplomacy with Russia. The one thing, it is shifting away from Russian arms platforms. They got the S-400 in large part because the Americans did not offer THAAD on, I don't even know if there's an offer for THAAD, probably not. And if they were offered THAAD, they were offered on a very high price, absurdly high price. If the Americans had offered to set up THAAD in India as part of a Indo-Pacific defense system, I think there would have been a very strong case of walking out of S-400. But having said that, the government is now diversifying on defense while intensifying efforts at going in for Russian oil, fertilizer and other resources, which is a sensible thing to do. We have to ensure that we take advantage of the cheaper resources in Russia. First point. And second point is, actually, the Russian ambassador in Delhi said something which is actually a great foreign policy achievement of our government, which is now being basically taken as a failure of the government. The Russian ambassador said Russia will not get involved if there is a confrontation between India and China. That is what they are saying is they will be neutral in that conflict. We have been neutral in the conflict between NATO and Russia. They will be neutral in the conflict between India and China. I think that's a huge plus for us because Russia joining China will be very much more difficult for us to handle. Pakistan, we're talking about two fronts. Pakistan itself is in some turmoil, if I may say so. I'm not really worried about Pakistan as much as I am of Russia. But now, under our diplomacy now, the Russians have made it very clear, we have got to deal with India. They have made it public, something that I have been saying in private for quite some time. And the deal is, if there's a war between Russia and US Atlantic Fund, we are not going to get involved. If there's a war between India and China, they will not get involved. For us, it's an excellent deal. So I think we're as far as, again I would like to say, as far as China is concerned, there is an existential battle of systems between the Chinese system and other systems. And in that situation, there is no question, in Cold War 2.0, what is the target country? It is China. So there is no question of balancing between China and, and whatever. And Russia is a historical friend. We stood by Russia when the Chinese backstabbed Russia and fought against Russia and helped the United States to defeat Russia. We stood by Russia during that time. And the Russians have stood by us. Even when the Chinese have attacked us, they have made it very clear they will continue to supply spares and other equipment to us. So that's a different relationship altogether. So there is balance is possible when there is mutuality of interest. Wherever there is a mutuality of interest, you find a balance. For the sake of balance, don't sacrifice interest. Only when there is a mutuality of interest, you go in for a balance. Otherwise, as I said very clearly, our allies are the democratic world. There is no question about it. We are a democracy, we stand with the democracy. In a battle between democracy and autocracy, we are for the democracy.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Devansh and I am the second year student at the department. Sir, I actually had two questions. One is my question, the other one of our ex-student, Gagi, has a question. She has joined us online. So, I have two questions. So, first I would like to go with her. So, she says that we are witnessing a series of geopolitical issues going on, like the Russian-Ukraine conflict and the China-Taiwan issue, and like Joe Biden's weak, which she assumes that, or she perceives a weak administration at the helm of US affairs. Do you think that there has come, or there will come a defining moment where India's foreign policy will be more outright, assertive, decisive, agenda setter types, so ultimately securing a veto power at the UN?
Yeah, I'd like to say to Gandhi that yes, you can see Jaishankar becoming almost undiplomatic in some of his recent comments. I'm glad he's doing that. So yes, I think so, because I have long said, for example, that being diplomatic to people who don't appreciate, who don't appreciate that, there's no point in that. We have been very, very forthcoming and diplomatic to some countries and got nothing back in return. So I'm glad we are being more assertive, and yes, I think we are definitely going to be more assertive because we have to draw a line in the sand. In the case of the United States, for example, I mean, this kind of obligatory lecture on human rights, actually I'm shocked at what's going on in the United States. The downtrodden societies, poorer people, slums, minorities, and I'm shocked that Joe Biden is throwing money at Ukraine, throwing money on weapons, and meanwhile American families are starving. American families are being denied medicine and food. That is where he should put his money. These are the people who voted into power. They didn't vote into power to go on a spree and please weapons manufacturers. They didn't vote into power to go and concentrate on Europe. They wanted to concentrate on themselves. So I think, frankly, despite Biden, the Supreme Court of the United States may ensure that the Democrats win with some of their judgments. But the reality is, we are definitely, I am very happy at the recent comments made by the External Affairs Minister, and I do believe that he will continue to in this particular way of speaking. So I think, that will be very clear in the months ahead.
Okay. So just a quick question, sir. Sir, since 2 days in one of our lecture, one of our subjects, India's worldview, we have been discussing about the definition of great power. So what is it about? So my question is along the academic lines that when we talk about India, it's all about we are dangling along the definitions of it's a middle power or the time has yet to come when India can be called as a great power. So I would like to reiterate that question. One of the questions which rose at that time, that are we ready to become a great power? That's my question, sir.
Are the Indian people ready to assume the role of great power? Are you ready? Do you think yourself to be as good as anybody else in the United States or China or Singapore? Or you think do you think you're good enough? You're as good as they are? Give me an honest answer, yes or no. Are you good enough as a student from the United States or Europe or Germany or Australia? Are you good enough? Yes or no?
Sir,
I'm asking you personally. Do you feel you're good enough? Yes or no? I mean, is that a maybe or is it a no or what is it?
So it's a maybe, sir.
Maybe. Well, I think you're good enough personally. But I'd like to say one thing. Obviously you're not been reading some of the stuff that I've been writing in public. So I would like you to do that if you can. Professor Google will help you. But, India, Russia, China and the United States are the 4 great powers of the world today, frankly. And the concept of a great power is the influence it has beyond its borders. A great power is a power that has got influence worldwide. That is the definition of a great power. The influence of a great power is worldwide. And as far as I see, our influence is definitely worldwide. I don't just mean Bollywood and all that, whose influence is of course substantial and worldwide, but I mean other things as well. So India, Russia, China and the US are, in my view, the 4 great powers. So again, bottom line, what is your influence outside your boundary? And if your influence is worldwide, you are a great power. In a sense, the British are, in some respects, a great power because of the English language and all that, and the cultural power. So, in some sense, the Israelis are a great power in terms of technology. The Taiwanese are a great power in terms of technology. They got worldwide, but they got worldwide in a particular segment. They don't have worldwide in a whole, in a whole platform of segments. And that only these 4 countries have got. India, US, Russia and China. So that's the definition of great power.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Radhika Shah. I'm from second year. My question is relating to what he asked. So you said India is ready to be a great power in coming future. So how the great powers before till now have been all the great powers have some kind of aggression, like aggressive characteristics towards had that aggressive characteristics. So, and India has always gone through the path of no first use policy and morality and everything. So I wanted to ask how much the characteristics of aggression is needed for India to be a great power. Is it needed at all, or is it okay for India not not to have the characteristics?
Actually, war is an admission of failure, that other steps have not worked. So war is absolutely the last option. So when we talk about aggression, you're basically, assertion of rights is one thing, aggression and trampling on the rights of others is another thing. So there will be aggression as such is of course obviously wrong. it should not happen. And but assertiveness in the sense of asserting your own interest is, I think, no harm in that. So obviously India will have to assert its interests in different ways. And as far as our capabilities are concerned, one of the reasons why we are, so important globally is that we have this enormous pool of young manpower. And a pool of young manpower that is capable of warfare in its comprehensive form, technological warfare, is important. Societal, so many other ways, and including in the military field. So I hope we don't commit acts of aggression, which is trampling on the rights of other countries, genuine rights. Certain countries have got fake rights. Like China, for example, makes border claims which are absurd. Pakistan is saying that Kashmir is a Muslim minority state, so it will belong to Pakistan. Nonsense. Muslims and Hindus are part of the same country. This two-nation theory is absurd. But our rights, we have to be assertive about it. And there's nothing wrong in that. But aggression, we are not an aggressive power, and I hope we never will be. I'm very happy to have this opportunity of being with you guys, because remember, the future we're talking about is your future. And it's a future which can be really amazing. Today, if you go and see a Chinese in, let's say, 1970 and a Chinese in 1990, there's a complete change in lifestyle and everything. Complete. You look at an Indian today and you look at an Indian 20 years later and you might see a huge change. And that can only come if, as our friend was saying, we have a policy structure, we have a format, and most importantly, we have the mindset that we can do it. Our young friend who asked me a question about great power, I'm sure that he can do a lot. He can come up with some interesting original ideas. The important thing is to have that self-assurance. And one thing about being in India, this country is not going to be a great power. It is a great power. And believe me, it's a great power not because of anything done by anybody, but it's a great power because of the wealth of ability of our people. And that means everybody here in this room. Thank you.